Oh, that was amazing. I just asked Ambika if she knew that he was going to share the paper right case study, because that is TIAA.
But I should have.
Pleasant surprise. All right, so we are excited to talk about, this is your idea, like what you wish you had known about before going client side. So you've had this incredible career, literally have traversed creative agencies like Mother and BBH. You're an associate professor at Parsons School of Design. You founded a creative-led strategy consultancy. You were CSO of Mechanism, and now client side. So if strategists are curious, yeah, I mean, give it up for like the rock star career this woman has had. And has a whole like book she's worked on, storytelling project about motherhood. Like Google this woman. There's a lot of amazingness on the internet. So you've kind of traversed, I feel like strategists are often curious about what it would be like to go brand side, and you've actually done it.
Yes.
So that's what we wanted to talk about.
Yes. So I went brand side after this grand announcement that I was leaving advertising to take time off to write my book and work on my podcast called Corner Office Breakdowns. And then got a call from an old client of mine, Zara Mirza, who had just joined TIAA. And I was like, what is TIAA? And she was like, oh, you know, a lot of people say that, but once you look into it, it is a Fortune 100-ish financial services company that has nonprofit roots. It's been serving higher education for many, many years and is now shifting more into healthcare. But it basically helps more Americans retire with dignity. And the work we are really proud of is some of what you just saw with Paper Right and the work around retire inequality. We have an entire government relations team where we actually speak to people on the Hill about policy change. And I was very intrigued because one of the challenges I felt working in advertising sometimes was that I didn't feel like sometimes the work was meaningful enough. And we live in a world where there's a lot of meaningful work that needs to be done. And I felt conflicted about the more commercially oriented work. So TIAA felt like a really interesting opportunity. And I had never gone brand side, obviously, before. But I love Zara Mirza. She is another incredible leader in the space of marketing. And so I was like, okay, let's see how this goes. And here we are, 10 months later.
Time for a new adventure.
Yeah.
So we want to talk a little bit about like perception reality.
Yes.
Let's start with what you thought it was going to be like before you went brand side.
Yes. So I was in advertising for a very long time. And I was one of the people who would sit there in frustration with my CCO partner and, you know, account managers and strategists and creatives and be like, why won't they buy this work? It's so brilliant. The research proves it out. Like, we know this is what people want. Why are they not buying it? And it was so easy to sit in that frustration. And that frustration, I didn't realize, is very much shared on the client side. It's just as heartbreaking to have an idea that you love and that you've fought for and you've really kind of cultivated that internal alignment for. It's hard to see those things die on the vine. And so there is this like a very similar emotional climate you sit in on both sides. That I don't think I understood fully before. And I didn't realize how challenging it is to sell in great creative work, even when you're on the brand side. And it's because we still haven't found a way to reconcile the ROI of brand and strategy. And it's mind-boggling because we have data up the wazoo that proves things like fame and cultural relevance drive business. And yet when rubber hits the road, we still struggle to kind of live by that philosophy. And so it's been a fascinating experience because I feel very much like the same person I was before, with the same thought processes, but in an extremely different container. Like financial services and advertising are pretty far apart.
Yeah. It's interesting in the PNC presentation earlier today, when their CMO said she feels like she's the chief translation officer.
Yes.
I realized that I've sometimes had a lack of empathy. Even the fact that we're like, well, the strategists are the translators.
Yeah.
And then hearing a CMO say, well, my job is also to be a translator. You're translating on this side, and maybe you think you're translating to me. I have this whole other side of translation I'm having to do that you don't have visibility into. I think another place where we sometimes maybe lack empathetic imagination is there's this assumption that like the agency side is like the full sprint across all these clients, and that maybe it will be simpler to be able to go deep instead of wide. I know that's something else we talked about.
It is not simpler to go deep instead of wide, because I mean, what I think agency partners see is the tree. The roots are very, very deep and interconnected across teams and interconnected across the economy and other forces of power and influence in our world. And so we are still up against very similar headwinds, and we feel kind of the tremors of industry in a way that I actually don't think advertising does. And this is maybe seems counterintuitive, but you know, I was the chief strategy officer of a medium-sized agency. I was a partner at a small agency. Like, I felt the immense responsibility of keeping the doors open and keeping people employed. And that has not gone away. And in fact, I think because brands, especially ones with legacies and histories, like TIAA is over 100 years old, brands of that size and that stature are having to pivot with such urgency that decisions are made in very quick turns. And so the amount of change and kind of adopting a more dynamic way of living and breathing at work every day that was shocking to me. Is that there is that level of like volatility. I know that's a harsh word, but there is that level of uncertainty and volatility even inside these big companies.
You know, it's interesting, you know, if you look at research on diversity, not just like racial, ethnic, and cultural diversity, but diversity within ecosystems, like economies, biological ecosystems, diverse systems are inherently always more shock absorbent. And so I think maybe we take for granted that within agencies, if you're serving, you know, CPG, but also finance, you know, but also automotive, but also, you know, food delivery and across the board, yes, there are going to be moments like a global pandemic where that is felt throughout, but you have diversity of the economy that's a little bit of a shock absorber versus in that kind of vertical, if your vertical is disrupted, there is no respite. I never really thought about that before.
Yes, exactly. And there is something to be said about like how deep you do have to go. I mean, I feel like I've just gotten my MBA in finance over the last 10 months. And, you know, I walked in a very different way than I would walk into an agency. I walked in extremely humbled because I was so new to the space. And even though people were like, we're bringing you in as the expert, like we're in a brand transformation, ultimately they'd be like, well, she's only worked in advertising. And I resent that, first of all, as a strategist, because I'm like, strategists are some of the deepest thinkers who are curious, who are reading, who are learning all the time, who are actually trying to sit there and help identify, as Marcus was saying, like the right problem to get to the right outcome. And so I was like, I'm not just an advertiser, whatever the fuck that means. I was like, I am a strategist who has been helping build businesses through the lens of creativity and innovation for many years. And so that was the flip side. I think as an agency, person, executive, you believe that you have access to the most brilliant, diverse minds across many industries, and so you can solve problems in a way that your client can't, not knowing your client's already tried to solve the problem using that way of thinking 10 times. They just didn't tell you about it. And so that assumption of superiority, which again, like I felt at times, and now I feel a lot of I've just been very humbled working on this side of the equation.
All right, switching gears for a minute, what do you not miss about agency life?
Well, our joke was timesheets, but just submitting expenses
Hashtag
is
the
like
tyranny of timesheets.
right.
Yeah.
It's so hard to answer that question after the last 2 days, because I have a deep love for advertising. Like, it's where I grew up. Am I going to get emotional about advertising and cry on the stage? I don't know. It's not out of the realm of possibility right now. But I miss the spirit of understanding that exists. I'm just going to say what I miss, maybe.
Yeah.
That exists within agencies, like hearing about the veteran work and having done projects where, you know, we are putting lactating breasts on TV for the first time ever and talking about the challenges of breastfeeding, which then, you know, I partnered with nonfiction research to like talk about the experiences of being a mother. Like, that level of human understanding happens much more at agencies, and it comes from the projects you're working on, right? Like you can go from working on a sports betting brand to working on Quaker oatmeal to working on vaccine hesitation campaigns, and so that scope of work is so rich and so kind of identity creating. And that's one of the hardest things to let go of.
Yeah. All right. What do you, with our last few minutes,
God,
what do you wish agency people knew about client side now that you're there?
That we care just as much as you. So the Martin Agency is our agency of record at TIAA, and I know there's a bunch of amazing Martin people that were sitting at my table yesterday. And so one of our big investments right now is in first generation students. So since we serve higher ed does not know how to support first generation students in the way that they need to. And so what that leads to is increased dropout rates, mental health issues, like people who, you know, are not the typical 19-year-old student who lives in a dorm, but actually a 30-something-year-old mother who has 2 jobs and is also trying to go to school. Where was I going?
I don't know, but it was really good. We were talking about what we wish agencies knew about the marketing side. You were saying how much you care.
Okay, so I'm sorry. I have COVID brain from 3 weeks ago, and I still have like mom brain, even though my child is 2.
I think that lasts forever.
Yeah, I feel like it does. But the Martin Agency came to us with the most incredible work around how to support first generation students and, you know, the people who are supporting them at these higher ed institutions. And we all fell in love. We were like, this is the best fucking idea ever. And it was so good. And it died. And there's another idea that I can't talk about, but it's like how women have more shallow pockets and jeans and money, so they connect, that we've been trying to make happen. But the reality is, if the economy takes a hit, if there's a data breach, if BlackRock comes out with something new, if, you know, one of your executives says something that some people don't resonate with, your business is impacted deeply. And so you have to pivot, and you have to kind of trust that a good idea will come to fruition because the right people are in the mix to make it happen. It just may not be this idea or now, and that sucks for all of us.
And I think sometimes having patience. I can remember working with a fashion retailer at one point, and I would do like a once a month or twice a month call with the CMO, like just to talk about the business.
Yeah.
Not to talk about the relationship, not to talk about the advertising, like just to talk about the business. And she was very generous with her time that she did that with me. And in some ways it ended up being like probably a little bit like therapy, you know, where she could just kind of vent and process, or we would like, you know, kind of solution storm things she was struggling with. But it meant that I had a much wider purview of what was going on in their business. And I remember a moment where there was this idea our team loved, and they kept bringing it back, and they kept bringing it back. And I went to them and I was like, hey, you need to stop right now. There's other things happening that have nothing to do with this. And all we're doing is burning relational capital by being like tone deaf about that. She loves the idea. If the moment comes, she'll be the first one to bring it back. But now is not the time. And I do think that maybe because we're also busy in some ways, there's a lot of CMOs that just wouldn't have that hour a month to give me. But we don't always have visibility into that. And so maybe I think thinking well of people. So really quick, we're almost at time, but conversely, what do you wish marketers, like brand side marketers, knew about their agency partners?
Ooh. I would say just how curious and spongy they are. I mean, to me, one of the biggest barriers to good work that I've experienced internally is that people have not worked on anything else. There are people who have been at TIAA for 10, 15, 30 years, which is very, like, we don't really see in our field to the same extent. And so I would say we need to understand that that cross-functional, diverse, category, kind of, not category agnostic, actually category entrenched thinking, but across a ton of categories, is more valuable than you can imagine. And if you couple that with, again, the roots of the tree, like that depth of knowledge from people who have been there and watched it ebb and flow over the years, that is actually where the magic happens. I have to say one thing for the strategists in the room, which is like 90% of you. Get to know the business. Like, even as a strategist, get to know the business for every single one of your clients. Like, read the annual reports, read the press that comes out, read the things they're struggling with, and develop the sort of relationship with your client where they can call you on the phone. And that's a struggle for some, like more introverted people who are like, oh my God, I can't be put on the spot and asked a question. But that goes such a long way, because then you're on the same team. And I think a lot of times people feel like the agency and the client are not on the same team because they can't see eye to eye, or they have different objectives, but actually a rising tide lifts all ships. So get to know the business. It is critically important, and even more so, which is the next talk, when you're thinking about transformation, and we are all in a state of transformation. Like, the industry is not the same, the economy is not the same, culture is not the same. We are not the same day to day. And so just live in that state.
I love it.